Welcome back, everyone, after lunch. I hope everyone managed to grab some food to fuel you for the afternoon. My name is Isabel de Pauw, and I'm part of the Milltown Partners team, the sort of convening organization for the AI Fringe. And I'm super, super delighted to welcome a panel today on supporting creative futures in the arts, culture, and AI. And here in the UK, recent sort of policy conversations around AI and creativity have really centered around the sort of government's consultation on AI and copyright, and that very sort of befuddling notion of text and data mining, but there's a whole raft of other issues at play, and this panel is going to dive into that for you. So it's my real pleasure to introduce this inspiring panel of speakers who who are very much thinking through the future of the creative profession in the broadest sense possible. So please join me in welcoming our moderator for today, Kester Brewin from the Institute for the Future of Work. We've got Thangam Debbonaire from UK AI, Victoria Ivanova from Serpentine Galleries, Suhair Khan from Open Ended, and Reema Selhi from DACS. So please join me in welcoming them and enjoy the panel.
Thank you so much. I was going to do some brief introductions, but I'm not going to do that now because you can waste so much time on these panels doing that. I was going to ask people to do that through the medium of song, but my name's Kester Brewin. I'm Associate Director at the Institute for the Future of Work. I'm also an author, published a number of books, so there's kind of lots of skin in the game for me on this, as well as also helping lead a project which was done in collaboration with the Turing Institute, Queen Mary University of London, and the University of Arts London, looking at the impact of AI on creative workers. That report is publishing soon. But I wanted to just offer a little bit of context about that to kind of kick off our discussion. First of all, we know that the UK creative industries are a powerhouse of the UK economy. They generate about 108 billion a year, and over the last decade, the sector's output has grown, hello, growth, the trigger word, at over 1.5 times faster than the rest of the economy. And the workforce has grown in the creative sector at about 5 times the rest of the economy. So when politicians talk about boosting productivity in the UK, the creative sector is a model for what is possible. And yet, the solution being banded around to our productivity puzzle, which is AI, actually looks at an existential risk for this sector. So in Paris and associated here, there's this AI Action Summit, and it needs action that looks to promote human growth, not just capital growth. As we get into this discussion, I'm minded that there was an article written last week which talked about, in terms of wider politics on the other side of the Atlantic, a lot of reaction, but not enough action. And I want to make sure that we focus our discussion not just on reacting to context, but also saying, this is what we think should happen. And it's good to be in a panel situation where we think that there are some really, really strong things that can happen. Firstly, summarize very quickly the Creative Project and what that has surfaced. First of all, creative workers are the canary in the mine. And that seems to be on 2 counts. One is that, and my son's in a band, so I know what a gig is, they are the original gig workers. These people are freelancers, and we're seeing now the gigification of so much else in the labour market in other sectors. And secondly, having long been thought to be protected from AI, actually it turns out that people in the creative industries are being most exposed most quickly. So for those 2 reasons, this is really the forefront, is what could be coming down the line for everybody else. And it's important that we kind of think about proper responses to that. Those are about existing rights which are being undermined. It's about the case for human creativity and flourishing to be made even more strongly. And for that, collective representation is so necessary. And I'm very grateful to DACS for convening this panel, who are obviously doing a lot on that. And also, the creative industries are not just, Paul McCartney standing up there talking about it. There is a whole pipeline of other work in other parts of the industry, right down through the people working in the music business or the creative business, or, other than the authors, the writers, the songwriters, who are reliant on this whole industry. It's not just about one person's work that's being replaced. So that focus on the kind of celebrity creative figures around generative AI is maybe a bit of a distraction. There's a very, very wider skills panel here. Thangam, if I can turn to you first. The government recently published a consultation on AI and copyright. Can you tell us what you think it gets right and what you think it gets wrong?
I think The first thing I think it gets wrong is that an awful lot of people in the creative industries get the impression that they've already made up their mind.
Yeah.
Now, that might be terribly unfair, but I think we have to bear in mind that a consultation, we have to take it at face value.
Yeah.
If it says consultation, that means consultation, and it has not yet closed. I think where we might end up, and I'm just going to chuck that out there, is they've given 4 options. Option 0 being do absolutely nothing. Option 1 being what we'd call opt-in. Option 2 being something that there's no point thinking about. And option 3 being opt-out with transparency as a sweetener. I think there is possibly an option 4 or an option 5, which is everybody slow down just a bit. Yeah. There is no rush to work out how we do this properly and recognise and reward creatives. We do have models. So the DACS model, the PRS model for musicians, there are ways of recognising and rewarding creativity and respecting copyright and intellectual property rights. I think they're really important, because you said, Kester, you know, we have an ecosystem here. And when governments of all colours like to talk about growth, they're often, in relation to the so-called creative industries, talking about TV, games and film.
Yeah.
Where do TV, games and film get their technicians from? Where do they get their stagehands from? Where do they get their costume designers from? Where do they get their musicians from? Where do they get their artists from? The other bits. And for the arts ecosystem to work as a whole and feed in to these over here, you actually need the whole ecosystem. That doesn't mean all must get prizes. Not everyone is going to get rich on AI. But at the moment, I know, it's annoying, isn't it? But at the moment, you can have a sneaking suspicion that somebody somewhere is going to make a lot of money. And if it isn't artists, but it is artists' work, and I'm going to use the first person, because although I'm now a happy amateur musician, I still count myself as in that world, and my sisters are both actual artists. I think we are probably the ones who aren't going to get rich. Now, if there isn't a load of money in it, and there is a fair method for recognising and rewarding musicians, authors, painters and publishers, etc., I want to see it. And that's my ask, both of government and of AI as a world, is show us the money, show us where everything's going, show us what's happening. If we really have nothing to fear, because I don't want to have a big fight if we don't need to, AI is a creative tool. Yeah. It's not just something that's going to eat us, but we want to know that it's not going to eat us, and if it's not going to eat us, let's see it. Let's see what it looks like, and in ways that everybody in this room and beyond can actually grapple with.
Yeah. I suppose one of the interesting things about this sector particularly is it's so full of people who are freelancers, which makes it very different to how you might be responding to technology adoption in a big company. Reema, DACS is a body that has worked for collective representation of creative workers. What have your members what have they been seeing in terms of impacts of AI, and why is that collective representation just so important at this particular time?
Yeah, our members are fundamentally, for the most part, freelancers who are some of the lowest earning members of the creative industries. If you're an artist in today's society, if you're a painter, a sculptor, or even if you're working in digital art and across the spectrum, your opportunity to receive fair pay for your work is getting harder and harder. Yeah. There's a huge lack of funding, there's a huge lack of infrastructure. A lot of artists who've worked with public institutions say that their average annual hourly fee is around £2.60 an hour. Yeah. And these are publicly funded institutions where the artist at the bottom is being completely squeezed. And we know that royalties that they receive from their work is a lifeline. It's a way to keep them going. It's a way to pay for studio rents, for materials. And it's all part of this ecosystem of what creates the incredible museums and galleries that we want to go to. Well, it's the content. It's the things that are inside it. It's the fact that we have amazing British artists who are continuing to work, even though their salaries or their wages are very, very low. So what the kind of AI issue represents to a lot of people is not something that will kind of necessarily undermine their thinking or their innovation. In fact, there are so many artists who want to use AI in a really fun and explorative way. What they're actually seeing is just a complete swallowing up of their IP, unfairly, unremunerated, from companies mostly based in the US. So it's not really a question about being anti-AI or not interested in progress. It's an unfair situation where people's work are just being taken for no value. Yeah. If the same was happening to any other sort of product, if vegetables and farms were being hoovered up so that new companies can create fun recipes, we just wouldn't stand for it. But for some reason, this kind of call and crisis is going a little bit overlooked.
Yeah. Victoria, do you want to tell us a bit about your work at the Serpentine in terms of new models that might offer some kind of alternative in terms of that value creation?
Yeah, absolutely. And this very much speaks to the points that you raised in the beginning about the need for collective bargaining at some level, right? Because I think the asymmetry of scale between individual creators, and that's exactly the point that you're making, Reema, and the companies behind frontier AR model development is just so great that it's unrealistic to think that a simple transparency, and there will be no simple transparency measure, because the question of transparency around AI is a super complex matter, that goes all across the entire AI development and deployment pipeline. And there's no, it's entirely unrealistic to expect that a creative, an artist, a musician, whoever within the broader context of creative industries would somehow be able to leverage those transparency measures in order to assert their agency or their economic agency. So kind of understanding this reality at Serpentine, I'm head of the R&D part of the organization, and I lead a project called Future and Ecosystems. We're very much interested in understanding what are alternative ways in which advanced technologies can be integrated into society, and how can artists really kind of lead the way in terms of showing what is possible, and lead the way not just at a kind of level of discourse and critique, but also showing infrastructurally what other models are possible. So over the course of the last 1.5 years, we have been working with artists Holly Herndon and Matt Dryhurst, who coincidentally or not so coincidentally or serendipitously are also co-founders of Spawning, which is a company that in this context has been known to develop a technology, a plugin that allows creatives to see whether their work has been part of training data sets of some of the major AI softwares of the last couple of years. So Holly and Matt also are artists, and they've been working, they're musicians, they've been working with various advanced technologies from AI to blockchain over the course of the last decade. And they're interested in these technologies as collaborators. And I think, when we're thinking about the generative, productive way in which AI could become that driver of growth, that's ultimately kind of the paradigm, right, that we should be investing in. And that's the paradigm that the government should be creating a policy and a copyright framework for. So with Holly and Matt, and also in collaboration with a number of great researchers from independent research organizations such as the Alan Turing Institute, Ada Lovelace, ODI, and really kind of looking at the work that they've done on participatory data stewardship models, we devised an experiment to see whether Serpentine could become a trusted data intermediary for a bunch of choirs across the UK with whom Holly and Matt worked to gather choral data in order to train a choral AI model. And so in some ways it was a slightly artificial experiment insofar as everybody in this, in this collaboration group had good faith, right? Holly and Matt wanted to really involve the data contributors, so the individual choirs. We as an organization wanted to ensure that there is some kind of balance between the needs of the choir contributors, the choristers, and also the needs of the artists. And we really saw our responsibility as Serpentine as this trusted data intermediary that would be able to take stewardship of the newly created data set, allow for the use of this data set in Holly's and Matt's project, which sadly just closed at Serpentine, but the choral AI models that they have developed live on. But equally interesting, what we tried to show is that existing organizations like ours and like many other cultural organizations, and perhaps such bodies as DACS, other representative bodies, they could take on this additional role of stewarding data sets, of negotiating with AI developers, of becoming the parties that really leverage the various mechanisms that the government might put into place around transparency on behalf of their constituencies. But this is a huge project of infrastructural augmentation. It's a huge project of skills development and creation of new roles, creation also of new technical mechanisms by which all of this can be enabled in the most optimized and efficient manner. And I think that realization that you can't just have like wave a magic wand and say AI will deliver innovation and there's a lot of creative potential. Yeah. Like there needs to be, it's not that, we had this conversation about being Luddites. It's not that creative industries are Luddites. On the contrary, we're seeing that actually people from the creative industries, they're innovators in the AI context. But as organizations that have been defunded, right, in the last decades, we don't have the capacity to take on the responsibility that we could in order to help most of the creatives in the field who will suffer in the type of ecosystem that is currently being proposed.
So can I bring you in here? I mean, do you think that it's kind of game over in terms of the big tech firms are just so big now, they're going to have it and IP is gone? And nice projects, you could say, well, a nice project of Serpentine, but cute. Not, cute, not realistic. How does that balance out?
I used to work for Google, so I think that's...
You used to, that's the main thing.
Well, I spent most of my career working on products at Google and really mostly in emerging frontier technologies and pretty much all of it connected to AI. And I've worked quite a lot with the Serpentine because I was also for a period on the arts and culture team at Google, which is based between London and Paris. So to your question, from a technology standpoint and from how we developed AI into the future, these conversations are both valuable and important. We have come to a moment where, on the one hand, there's incredible innovations in AI, from driverless cars, which was like my first job ever, to thinking about the future of protein folding and so on and so forth. But we are going to confront at some point a question around imagination. I think if you look, this is my opinion, if you look at AI systems as they're designed today, everything from robots to going to space, most of the actual inspiration for most of the big founders of large companies can be linked back to science fiction in so many different ways, which is fine, that's great, but we are in a new era and we're in a new moment, and these decades-old narratives shouldn't really be setting the path for the future. So how do we lean into the creative sector, to artists, to new ways of channeling imagination by thinking about where we could go with technology today? And I think there is a huge gap in imagination, and we're seeing it over and over again in investment, in government policy, and in frankly reducing the idea of art and creativity to the creative industries as sort of an economic imperative. So that's to the one hand. I think to the other hand, government has a great opportunity, particularly in this country. We have a unique confluence of an incredible creative and cultural sector, and obviously incredible R&D in all science and technology, and we've been hearing this a lot over the last year. And now is a question of how do we channel work that's already happening and think about where it should stand. So it might be a cute art project until it's connected to a large technology investor who can power it to the point where we're modeling new sorts of data governance models and AI ownership. But that also requires a sharing of the spoils and of the profits of it. And I think that's where there's a disconnect. And so clearly, this is an obvious point, most technology is being built within the fiduciary model of large American technology companies, but that model will also shift, and that's inevitable. And I think the conversation should be about how can we fund and empower organizations that are already sitting at the cutting edge of this work and help them to drive in new directions, even if it's experimental or speculative. How do we build more investment in R&D for AI? I call it creative, R&D and AI. And then secondly, having a realistic conversation about how much change is really possible, and is that really the point of these conversations that we're having? Because if we think about really the issue with creatives and freelancers, that's a systemic issue. We saw it during COVID. I mean, if you didn't have a furlough payment and you were a great opera singer or a violinist, you didn't have any money. So I think how we treat people who are outside of large cultural institutions, who are outside of large organizations, is more about how we're treating them anyway. Yeah. And I think this is just a reflection of all of the policies that government should be readdressing. And I think AI is important for the future of work, but it's serving as a distraction in some cases for how we should be protecting our creatives in this country in particular, where we have we have the world's greatest architects, choreographers, dancers, tenors, and what are we doing to actually protect them?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. Interestingly, there's some thinking I was doing recently about what exactly it is that a technology does. And if you go back to a very simple technology like a hammer, it amplifies your ability to do stuff in the world. I can't push nails into the wall with my thumb. Some here might be able to, but I can't. But a hammer allows me to do that. But it also comes back through the arm into the heart and says, what do you want to do with that extra power? And that's the question that I think needs to be asked is, okay, we have created this extraordinarily powerful technology, which means the questions that it asks us are also extraordinarily significant. And it's kind of really important that those in power are able to kind of ask those questions properly and to get a proper democratic understanding of what the answers to those would be. One of our co-founders at IFOW was at a major AI conference over in the Far East, I think it was, and said to these guys, like, what's the point if it makes us all unhappy? To which they didn't particularly have an answer. But Thangam, I wonder if you feel that governments are asking those questions about what are we doing this for?
I can't speak on behalf of government, but I can speak as a once and future politician.
Yeah.
So for those of you who don't know, I was an MP until last year and I was Shadow Secretary of State for Culture, and in 4 weeks' time I'll be going back at the other end of Parliament. And I intend to use my voice there for that purpose. And one of the things I've found since I'm not an MP anymore, and it's a real problem for politics, is that I actually have space to think, where previously, all of you who write to your MPs, and I'm sure all of you do because you're all doing democratic engagement, but every time someone writes to their MP, they do have staff, but not very many. And I had an above average number of constituents, and you have to think about hospitals, schools, potholes, rubbish collection, lots of things that should be to do with the council but end up in your inbox. And the space to think about what is the nature of art, I didn't actually get to do. I did while I was Shadow Secretary of State for Culture. Now, some might argue, and that's why you lost, Thangam. And they'd probably be right, but that's okay, because actually that led me on to thinking that I want to be able to spend my time with people who want to figure that out. At what point does the intervention of a human become irrelevant? What is the point of AI if it isn't so that human life can be better? Because if it's so that human life can be worse, which is the implication, if it isn't so that it can be better, I agree with you. What's the point? In my fantasy world, AI frees us to be able to value, and economically value in particular, those activities which are best done by humans. So caring, creating, using your imagination, all of those sorts of things, but also things that may look technical but actually require you to have creative flair, imagination, the ability to think beyond yourself and into another situation. Technical things also require you to have the skill which is imagination. And when I try and imagine what it would be like if we had lots and lots of beautiful art and perfectly written books, all written by AI. Let's say, for a sake of argument, I was on a radio show this morning when they said, oh no one can tell the difference. I said, well, even if that's true, which I dispute, even if it's true, is that the world we want to live in? Do we want to live in a pretty version of Blade Runner? If you're not as old as me, you might not know what I'm talking about, but do watch it. It's really useful film for helping you to frame, is this the world we want to live in? Because I tell you what, nobody's happy in Blade Runner.
Yeah.
Nobody's happy.
People have asked me, do you think AI will ever write a great novel? And my answer is, well, maybe it will, but who would care?
Yeah, well, I had this argument.
That's the point, if it's not from the place of that human wound, then maybe we shouldn't care about that.
I think also there's the thing about frailty and flaws. So just to test myself out, I was listening to one of my favourite pieces of music last night, which is Shostakovich's Seventh Symphony, which was written during the Leningrad siege. He'd actually got out Shostakovich, and it was smuggled back in so that the nearly dead orchestra, and they were nearly dead, some of them did literally die in rehearsal, could perform it. It's not his best symphony. There are flaws. Yeah. It was used as a morale booster for the Russians. It was used as a morale, the oppositor, for the Germans. They broadcasted it on loudspeakers. Now, to me, that's the wonderful conjunction of music and the human spirit. Now, if AI could generate Shostakovich's Seventh Symphony, it still wouldn't do that. It still wouldn't stimulate people to think, I am going to keep going even though my lungs are so exhausted, I'm probably going to die playing this trombone. Like I said, some did. It wouldn't stimulate to human beings to get up and cheer the musicians on when they looked like they're about to collapse.
And if you've not read Lewis Hyde's book, The Gift,
yes,
wonderful, wonderful book. Reema, in a sense, this speaks to the point about we can have lots of technical arguments about copyright and opt-in and opt-out, but is there a wider frame than we need to be pushing for as well, beyond just, this consultation, these these four options?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, Suhair, you kind of nailed it on the head in terms of the AI conversation is a bit of a distraction to wider issues in cultural policy. And, ultimately, actually, kind of going back to what you said at the beginning, the AI argument is the canary in the coal mine.
Yeah.
So we're seeing the conversations that the creative industries are having with government are going down a very, very strange route where they're effectively saying, okay, well, where's the economic harm in that work being copied as part of a large data set? If it's not really there, then we don't really care. And that's a very shameful, I think, position to be taking, because it misses this bigger picture of why we have a cultural industry, why we have such wonderful soft power, why tourism is really, relies on having incredible things that people want to go and see. It misses that very, very big picture and focuses extremely into this economic argument. I think a shift in cultural policy making needs to happen. I think we wouldn't be at a point where a government had released a consultation with only 0 to 3 options rather than 5, if there was a true understanding of this complete ecosystem of how people make their work, of how people contribute to the sort of wider creative network. I don't want to call it industries necessarily, because it doesn't always have to be economic. And without that, that's where you get to the point of relatively strange policy making, which these very binary, bizarre options that we've been given in this consultation reflect.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to make us kind of think more about action. Victoria, what would you say, in terms of trying to influence policy, trying to think about skills and better quality work in the creative industries? What would be your kind of top things in terms of, okay, these are some actions that we should take forward?
Well, I guess one of the points I've already alluded to, which is to really kind of consider the different scales of the ecosystem that is required in order to ensure that AI does actually work for the creative industries. And here, I think, putting more emphasis on more experimentation around how existing organizations, institutions, representational organizations can augment their existing stewardship roles. And to serve their end beneficiaries, artists, creatives, et cetera, within the AI economy. I think secondly, and maybe this is sort of a bit of a point that actually doesn't just apply to the creative industries, but more broadly, I think we need to make a distinction between frontier models and application-specific models. And when we're talking about the creative industries, most likely, the models that will be developed in the creative industries won't be frontier models. They will be application-specific models. And this is a huge space for experimentation and actually the birth of new creative forms, and perhaps of the type of zeitgeist kind of affective power that art can have. And speaks to your point around imagination, Suhair, where we really need artists and creatives to be part of this ecosystem. So the mechanism designed for the creative industries context needs to take into account that these people need to have the education, going from art school to starter positions within new emerging industries, that ensures that we have creatives going into the technology sector and informing how that field is being shaped. I think where we don't want to end up is like a completely siloed technology sector and a creative sector that is in a very antagonistic relationship to the technological overlords. What we want is to create greater cross-pollination, and in fact, if we look on the ground, de facto, it is actually happening. It's just somehow it's happening from bottom up, which means that it's easy to fizzle out. So in order to ensure that it doesn't fizzle out, we need top-down investment and top-down visibility on these processes.
Is that how you see things going, sir?
Well, and I don't want to speak for you, but also, I mean, the sort of size of the teams right now in cultural organizations or not-for-profits or even universities that are trying to build, you know, you guys run a team, there's a Creative Computing Institute at UAL and so on and so forth, have limited resources and are actually doing amazing work, but it just, there's no value capture of it. So I think now everyone will like me a bit less. I just think we have to accept that creativity and the creative industries are going to change. They've already changed. So I'm sure we'll still have incredible novels and movies and songs, but not everybody will share your tastes or your desire to know who sang a song or who wrote a film. And I think the way we think about content in particular is going to have to evolve to assuming that multimodal AI is going to be shaping a lot of what we experience in the near future, and we have to be prepared for that. Having said that, to our earlier conversation, the creative sector should not be left out of it, A, because government should be valuing it. Secondly, because technology companies should be valuing the advantage of human inspiration and all of the things that we've already discussed. And finally, it's possible to create models which are commercially feasible that will benefit both the input and the output of it. I'm not saying that it will necessarily be fair or equitable or acceptable. And I think it will be a very difficult time of transition in the creative sector in general. But the way we're going right now is actually those who are meant to be protecting for the future. If we don't have a cultural sector as it stands in 10 or 20 or 50 years' time, that's to the huge detriment of society in this country and beyond. In the short term, it'll help the profit of a few organizations. And I think that's where we should be thinking about who has skin in the game. And also, on the other hand, how can we create more conversations and bridges between those who are in deciding positions at R&D labs, in big tech companies, you know, innovating, building new technologies. How can we show them and expose them to the work that's already happening on the ground? Because I'm sure it will actually be valued in the way that I appreciate and value it, and where they're not necessarily aware or exposed to it. And I think that's where a lot more bridging needs to happen, a lot more embedding of outside perspectives, disagreement needs to happen in ways that are safe and useful. And I think there is a commercial model that can come, definitely at the end of it, but with the understanding that it's probably going to be difficult to find an equitable solution. And the more you have voices like you, the more at least raising awareness of the challenges there.
One of the things we attempted to do in the creative project that we were running with Turing and others is to develop the system that or the tool that we had developed at the Institute for the Future of Work, the Good Work Algorithmic Impact Assessment, which was designed to be used in collaboration with the ICO, designed to be used in firms for when technology is introduced, to have a full stakeholder engagement process, you know, and we've been through this process, you know, in a logistics company, for example, talking to the drivers, talking to the admin staff, talking to everybody across the organization, saying, how would this new system impact you? And, you know, to what extent will it improve your work or change your work in other ways? And what research has shown is that when you do that, these systems can lead to higher skills, to better engagement, and so on. What we've been trying to do is to understand, is it possible for a model like that to be used by freelancers in creative context? You know, very, very difficult and very different power imbalance if you're a freelancer, say, going to the BBC and they're saying, well, hold on a minute, how does this work? And I wonder, Reema, if you think that, you know, actually what this is going to bring about is a strengthening of collectives, whereas artists are still working freelance, but working together in order to kind of, you know, coalesce into action bodies that can really affect this kind of change.
Yeah, I mean, I think even just before the kind of AI conversation really kicked off and was considered being quite concerning for creatives, COVID, I think, was the other major moment in people's lives where they realised that working as a freelancer, whilst it has a lot of benefits and flexibility, it really leaves you out in the cold. And so there's been an awful lot of noise and push towards how we recognise creative freelancers and the kind of barriers that they face through government intervention or through government support, such as a creative freelance commissioner. So I think there is going to be a growing need for more collective, more joined up voices, but also I think re-looking at what we consider people who make work and how they make it. Yeah. And trying to depart a little bit from our kind of traditional notions of employment practice as being really the only way in which you'll be able to get sick pay or a pension, and really reframing what it is to be a kind of human worker in today's society. I think that's going to happen a lot more.
Yeah. The point made about Luddism earlier was, you know, the Luddites, that the story has been told about and that they were kind of anti-technology. They weren't. They were pro-people. The reason they smashed those machines was because they saw these machines taking a skilled craft and kind of mechanizing it in a way that wasn't promoting their own human flourishing. And that seems to be an important thing. Like, you know, we're not being anti-technology, we're being pro-people. And how do we establish that going forward? Just one last comment from Tam, and then I want to go out to questions and get as many of those in as possible. I will warn you, I spent 25 years in secondary education in London. I've had kids chucking chairs at me, so I will cut you off if yours is more of a point rather than a question.
I just wanted to pick up on something Suhair said, which came about from an argument I had with a writer friend of mine recently, and he said, "You're a snob," he said to me. "You're being snobbish about books that are produced by AI." He said, "You don't realise how much of what people," I said, "Not me." He said, "Well, other people are reading books that are at least partly written by AI, and who the hell are you to say that you think Balzac's better? And anyway, AI will be able to produce better Balzac." And I just thought it's important to own that, because there are plenty of things that are mechanised in ways which 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago we wouldn't have thought about. Technicolor is not a thing anymore, and it used to be literally colour and paint.
Yeah.
And are we mourning it? I mean, I kind of am nostalgic, but I think my friend's point was sort of right, was that I was being incredibly snotty about certain art forms that could arguably be perfectly adequately reproduced. I still would come back to the philosophical one, and he had to admit defeat in the end when I said, do we want to live in that world, though? Is that the world we want to live in? But it remains a question.
Yeah, absolutely. A good point to turn to questions, and we've got a roving mic. Thank you. Yes, first one here, and we'll take 2 questions straight away. Thanks.
Thank you. Hi, I'm sorry.
All good.
Hi, everyone. Firstly, Thangam, we're very sad at this current moment that you're not Secretary for Culture, because we need a fierce advocate for the creative industries right now. I am currently doing some work with Oxford University looking at collective models for licensing for the news industry in the AI era. And I'm really keen to kind of build on what the panel's been talking about. So Thangam said not everyone's going to get rich from AI, and that is my real concern for the creative industries. So Victoria, I'm really interested to know whether your experiment progressed to actually having conversations with tech developers. And Suhair, as a escapee from Google, I'm keen if you could put some colour on your idea that there could be commercial models that benefit both sides.
Thank you. We'll just take one more at the same time and then get the responses.
Should I just ask?
Yeah, thanks.
Okay. First of all, thank you for this great panel. It was very insightful. So I'm Navneet. I work at the Mindrew Center for Tech and Democracy, looking at how tech is affecting the state of our democracy. But I'm also a book critic, but it's not my full-time job because no one's going to pay me enough. So if anybody, needs a book critic. And I wanted to kind of say, I also I study kind of these ideas of stories and sci-fi, and looking at how those stories are informing how we see the artist. As if, the mechanization of the artist is kind of something that really feels like a barrier in this space. So I guess my question would be, how would you talk differently about the artist as in the context of AI? Is the artist there to be a worker, to work, to produce, to efficiently make us more art? Or is the artist there to provide us novels to the level of Balzac or Rushdie? I'm also a snob. So I guess as a strategic communicator about AI and stories about AI, what kinds of stories would you tell about artists themselves?
Yeah, should we start from the fun copyright question? Licensing. So this was a big part of our experiment, which was to actually create a framework that is real, that is a real world. It's not just a napkin sketch of a speculative design. So we're just releasing a white paper that will come out next week, so happy to send that if you're interested. But in short, what we ended up doing is the choristers who were involved in the recording sessions, they were all performers, so they had performance rights. Some of them were soloists, so they also had data rights under GDPR. For the performance rights part, instead of having them assign the rights to us as an organization that would then do with them as we please, or to the artists who would then do with them as they please, we had them retain their rights. So that's sort of maybe somewhat in line with the opt-out option. And then to sign a licensing agreement with Serpentine as a trusted data intermediary for further sub-licensing of basically the rights in the data set to AI developers. Now, what this model has shown is that it is logistically incredibly difficult to actually get all of these signatures. And we even had a data steward in place who worked with the choristers to kind of onboard them, to provide information, to really surface their preference. So it was a true kind of good faith participatory data stewardship project. Now, on the side of working with technology companies, actually we already have interest from an open source AI company to develop another AI model based on the data set that we're currently stewarding. So that seems possible. I mean, we're also considering of putting the data set on Hugging Face, which is a platform that a lot of open source developers use. But I think this one issue is exactly that around this, like we need a signature from every single contributor, right? And that, when we're thinking about the scale of data sets for training AI models, unless it's a highly curated, small data set, like that seems quite difficult. So alternative approaches would be welcome. I'm quite unsure what they would be in the context of the existing copyright law. And then, of course, the next step is enforceability, right? So in our case, the data set is gated, so we provide access to whoever makes a request. So we have a certain level of control over how that data set is going to be used. But if we, let's say, open the data set on, released it as an open data set on Hugging Face, there will be no way for us to trace how this data travels across the online ecosystem. So I really, don't think that licensing in and of itself is going to solve anything for creatives. We really need, and I'm sorry to say this, but another technological solution, infrastructural solution, for how data's movement is traced, at the point of it being passed on to the sub-licensee.
Thank you. Yeah, there's some interesting blockchain stuff which may be able to help with that. So do you want to come in on that question?
Sure. Sorry, the snob thing. One of the things I just wanted to say, it's so easy now. We're very language and kind of popular extremism, and so what's a snob and what's not a snob? I think whatever, you guys, everyone has different tastes, and that's the point of having a good old disagreement with a friend. Anyway, so to your point, I mean, yeah, I didn't exactly escape. I was there for really long, like too long, in one place. I think that, so I'm actually working on a new project, so you're welcome to email me, anybody that's trying to figure out how we can, is it possible? I don't know, I think it's possible to create a model where you are circling back financial, economic benefits to creatives. I think I've seen too much of grants and one-off project funding, and you don't see actual investment and ownership of IP over a period of time in the creative space. Andreessen Horowitz, the venture fund, has a cultural leadership fund that's attempting to do that with African American creatives in the US, because they've seen a huge gap in kind of funding and a building of generational wealth. And I think there's many opportunities to build out models that are being intentional about creating wealth outside of just purely the technology sector. And that's something that I'm trying to interrogate in my work. I think that equally, there needs to be room for more experimentation and more access to cutting-edge research in AI for the creative sector. So it's not just about like getting some cash to go and make a website. It's about like, how are you at the cutting edge, and where are those doors opening for you? And I think that's a harder conversation because once you're in, it's just, it's a lot easier. I'm fortunate I can call up my friends, have a coffee, chat with them about what they're working on, but not everybody has access to that. Again, that's a great role for government to play. It's like not just for the creative sector. How are you opening up doors in R&D that are there for the defense industry, for example, and are there for the healthcare industry? So that's another channel that I think could be eventually lead to commercial opportunities in the space. But you're welcome to email me. And the final thing I'll say is actually about trust. Is that something that we haven't touched upon yet, but the Serpentine and DACS have trust with artists and with creative people. And at the end of the day, you can have very good intentions, but if you don't have buy-in both ways, the reason we kind of all, Google Arts and Culture, got lots of amazing data from cultural institutions was we had an agreement that we would not use their collections for commercial purposes, which we didn't. We had legal agreements, but there's also a degree of trust in an exchange and an arrangement. And I think that applies to government, and it applies to who should be building these tools and platforms, those who have the trust.
And if I could just come in there to answer this question about what's a good collective model. I mean, DACS has been going for 40 years, so we're relatively new in the collective licensing space. I mean, PRS Music is 110, right? So this is years and years and years of practice in how to do collective licensing for all types of work. So this is going back to very, very physical products all the way into the digital age. There's no reason why collective licensing cannot work in the AI environment. The only barrier being a lack of transparency. And it's that barrier that we really need to overcome. So if there was a way in which we could understand what works had been used and when in large language models, or even not just frontier models, but refinement applications, that's where this dynamic licensing can exist. And I think it's been a shame that the way in which the government kind of have looked at this is a failure of a licensing situation, as if copyright isn't necessarily working, rather than it's AI transparency that is not working. And that's where we need to progress.
Just very quickly on the story element, the book I wrote about AI, A 500-Year History of AI, was trying to address that exactly and saying, look, we won't understand how it's going to work in the future unless we look back at some of the myths, the monsters like Frankenstein that have come from our past and how we've dealt with those interactions between, you know, godlike technology and before. And I do think that all of the arts in the past, you know, Shakespeare, Faust, Marlowe, all of these things can help us understand these big questions. We need to be looking more into the past about our own kind of long story and myth in order to be able to understand the future. Let's take another question, please. Yes, we'll take 2 quick questions here and we'll try and speed up. Yeah. So 1.5 times speed, play.
Yeah, so Stable Diffusion trained their model on a lot of images without asking the artists, and then released the model open source. Obviously, it's like a great tool for everyone to use to express themselves, but also, you know, if future versions of that basically replace artists, if artists don't have any orders, if they don't have breadth, and if no one's really, like, no one can distinguish between their work and AI-generated work, like, what does artists live on? What incentivizes them to express themselves, to create? Like, why would kids go and create art if there isn't really any sort of, like, trajectory where their first work is recognized? Like, how to actually, you know, like, support creative futures?
Thank you. Very quickly, and then we'll get some answers.
Hypothetical question for everyone on the panel. I have no idea whether or not any of you have offspring. But imagine you do, if you don't. And imagine your kid is a competent artist, but probably not in the top decile globally in their chosen artistic profession. Would you tell them to get a proper fucking job?
A very quick answer to that. My son is 21 on Wednesday. He's been in a punk band since he was 10. And I've told him, spend your 20s not having a proper fucking job. And the gigs he goes to, they're seeing a movement of young people who are sweating their off in places with no coverage. Phones are not really like the thing. And they want that real human experience. They're not really getting paid for it. In a sense, the climate's busting. They don't really care. So there's an element of like, well, let's just get on with it. Answers to the other ones, yes, please, yeah.
So, look, I don't think it is the case that if you use stability to make your work, that you're not an artist. I think that is completely incorrect, right? So there's this AI auction at Christie's at the moment in New York, and there's been an open letter saying cancel this because of the fact that those models are illegal models. They are unlicensed models. Yeah. If they were legal licensed models, we wouldn't have a problem with that. Right? And we would actually be very much celebrating some incredibly pioneering artists who are at this auction right now. And I think we should be focusing on fixing the problem at the LLM stage and not blaming artists for using tools. But also, my parents are still telling me to get a fucking job.
Thangam, can you get a proper job, please? Then
Well,
tell us
I mean,
why.
I'm a politician, so, you know, work that out. Is that a proper fucking job? I think I would probably say to the imaginary child, like, having an imagination, whether you are a high-ranking artist or a low-ranking artist or the thing that I'm accusing myself of being, which is, you know, a snob. I'm okay with it, by the way. I don't think it has to matter, because I think one of the things that's going to happen over the next 5 years, not even 10, is the very nature of work, the very nature of what it is to have a job, the very nature of what it is to make money, possibly even the very nature of money. Other people would probably say, look behind you, that happened already. Yeah. You know, that's all going to change. It can be very scary, but it will be the kid with the imagination who will probably make the most out of their experience in the world. And also, speaking as a happy amateur musician, honestly, it's a lifetime of joy.
Yeah, 10 seconds, 10 seconds. Victoria.
I also have children. I largely agree with Thangam's point about everything. You know, we're in a state of flux, kind of ontological categories being completely upended by what is going on experientially, right? So, you know, I think we need to sort of de-ghettoize the artist position. I think we need to slightly de-romanticize it as well. Like, and I think actually applying artistry towards the infrastructures and the systems in which our societies exist is a major project for the 21st century. So perhaps we should all just become artists.
Yeah.
On the disruption element, I think that, you know, we're looking almost the wrong way. I think we're looking still towards Google and OpenAI and these like entities. We should be looking at the global south. We should be looking at other governments. We should be thinking about where else innovation is coming from and what sorts of narratives we want to play into and shift our dependence and also anxieties. It sounds easier said than done when there's this huge power imbalance, but I think if I don't have a kid, if I had a kid, I would say try look the other way if you can, and there will be more answers, I think.
Yeah. We are all artists, actually, yes. And that is going to become even more true in a world, in Elon's world, where none of us are going to have to work. But that's why this has been so important. Thank you so much to all the panel. This is the canary in the mine. We can build a fairer future of better art and better work, but we've got to have that agency. We've got to have that democratic courage, and we've got to work together to be able to do that. So thank you so much to all the panel.